Council. And Derek and Pippa have invited me to join this group, and we thank them very much for dreaming up these sort of monthly sessions. I think they're really useful, and I know that our guest panelists were very happy to be invited today. Derek said we're going to be doing Q&As at the end, so if you have a question at any point, then put it in the chat. We're aiming to finish at 5:30, so any questions that haven't been answered at that point, we'll ask the panelists to respond to later in text form if possible. So Cornwall Council declared a climate emergency in January 2019. Subsequently signed off an action plan in July of that year. The Council's action plan was always predicated on Cornwall Council only being a player amongst many. There's a real need for town and parish councils, community groups, businesses, social enterprises to also get involved. Hopefully today we can share ideas on how collectively we can all drive change. Somebody needs to mute still. So anyway, I'd like to welcome Peter Marsh, Jackie Ward and Steve Ford today. They're going to talk us through what has happened since 2019 with the delivery of the action plan, both in terms of changing the way that the council operates and how working with others is starting to shape change. But also talk about some of the challenges apparently of the pandemic and how this has led to new ways of thinking. So I'm assuming, Stephen, you'd like to speak first? So Stephen is Head of Environmental Growth and Climate Change. So Stephen, over to you.
Okay, actually the script is written such that I'll start and Stephen will come in. But first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm Peter Marsh. I'm the Service Director for Environment and Climate Change at Cornwall Council. Steve will introduce himself in a moment, and Jackie, and then we'll move through a presentation. I'm more than happy to try and take questions at the end rather than in the midst, if that's okay. Steve, do you want to just introduce yourself, and likewise then Jackie, and we'll move on.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name's Steve Ford, and I'm the Head of Environmental Growth, Climate Change and Heritage at the Council.
Hi, afternoon everybody. My name's Jackie Ward. I'm Head of Waste for the Council, in charge of recycling and waste collection.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So thanks for the invitation first and foremost. It's you know, we're only going to meet this agenda if we share what we're doing and if we take a collegiate approach to it. So pleased to be invited. What are we doing in terms of developing our response then? Obviously, I think it's fairly clear from lots of evidence that the disadvantaged and vulnerable are most likely to be impacted by climate change. We've got a vulnerable coastline, and many of you will recognise the picture of Coverack that wasn't very long ago, and the devastation that was caused there by the flash flood. Seasonal changes are going to impact food chains in the longer term as well, and the council has declared a climate emergency. It has been lobbying for resources and powers, and it has prepared an action plan that's been published in July 2019, and that we're held to account against as officers. But as I've said, it's a collegiate approach. So what's Cornwall Council's mission then? We've spent some time consulting, talking to communities, and effectively have come up with a new strapline, which is leading with the communities of Cornwall to combat climate change, fight injustice, and create a fairer future for one and all. And I don't think many can disagree with that statement. It's a good statement of intent. It's been brought about in a collegiate manner, but it is one that we've got a leadership role as a local authority, but it's one that we can't do on our own, and you'll see that as we go through the presentation. So there are three things to this. I'd just draw your eye to the centre of the screen, where it talks about the ecological emergency, it talks about the climate emergency, and it talks about the environmental adaptation. And for us, each of these is in inevitably linked together. We are in the midst of despite being in a beautiful place in Cornwall, and we have the benefits that are all around us, despite that, we are in the midst of an ecological emergency with a decline in species, changes in habitats, and something that Cornwall Wildlife Trust have recently published some really stark statistics in that regard that I'd urge you to have a look at. So it's not as green and pleasant a land as we perhaps think. Likewise, climate action plan, we have got a plan to get to net carbon neutral by 2030 as a local authority. Our ambition is to effectively influence the communities as well to do likewise. And we have got a local flood risk management strategy, a shoreline management plan, and there's significant challenges ahead for Cornwall, based again linked inextricably to the top line of climate change driving all of these changes. So there's 3 documents that we'd ask you to take some time to look at if you get the opportunity. What's the council's role then in this system? And if you look at this chart from top left, starting with, the council is directly in control of a number of elements. It's in control of its estate, it's in control of its property, it's in control of its services, but it's not in control of everything, as you would rightly expect. But we have got influence as well through funding. There are changes that we can drive through enabling funding into different areas. We can enable change through policy, and we've been looking and have a climate change DPD, which effectively will influence development into the future and the planning process. So we've got policy change that we can drive. We can influence locally in different ways, and that's partly why we're here today. And there are other areas where we will need to ask for, or seek national assistance if we're going to get to the level that we need to get to. So as you can see, we've got one part to play. We'll talk a little bit further about what we're doing. We'll talk a little bit further about what's happening in communities. And the aim of today is to equally then have a collegiate approach as to what can we do together better, faster, quicker, differently. We're up for that challenge, but we don't hold all the answers. Let's move on. You're on mute, Steve, I think. Sorry.
The oldest trick. I don't know how many times I've done that, so apologies for that. So I'll be taking over from here, and I'll be quickly running everyone through what we've done as an organisation. But I think it would be remiss of us not to take what's happened in the last 12 months into consideration. We had a trajectory in terms of what the organisational journey was that got turned on its head on literally almost a year to the day, really, when we first went into lockdown. And what you can see on the right-hand column there is we, along with lots of other organisations, have seen massive changes to the way we work. So whether it's in areas of business travel, flights, rail, commuter miles, all of those, how much we're printing, what we're consuming, they've all gone down by huge figures. And in many ways, it's helped us to accelerate many things that we wanted to do anyway. So as a local authority, we've taken the decision that we have to bounce forward and not bounce back, and make sure that while COVID has brought some extreme pressures, which I'm sure all of you are aware of on sort of personal and professional levels, what it has done is it's almost like snapped us into a different way of thinking and a different way of working. So a lot of those reductions that you see on the right hand side, even if not all of them will be retained, a huge proportion of how we've already changed our working patterns will be maintained moving forward. So it's just something to just to bear in mind, and we can talk about that a little bit more in a while. What COVID has done is to really get us thinking as a local authority about where we work, why we travel, where we live and how far we're having to travel to some of our main offices, and actually how effective home working has been in the main, certainly for a high proportion of council workers, not for all. And it's about how do we start to recalibrate ourselves as a local authority so that we're not having to do a 30 or 40 mile commute. I think the average is just under 30. So, you know, how do we start to recalibrate ourselves so that we can use more digital options, and if we do have to travel and we do have to have that face-to-face contact with people, then we do it in a way that reduces our emissions as much as possible. So it's just something to bear in mind. So what's the journey that we've been on? One of the first things we did as a local authority was to understand, you know, what's the picture in Cornwall. You know, what's the greenhouse gas? What is the inventory? These should be well versed to most of you here who've got a knowledge of this. You know, we have a high proportion of our greenhouse gas emissions that come from agriculture. Transport has been consistently challenging as a proportion of our emissions as well across Cornwall, and the council has, you know, obviously we don't have the same proportion of agriculture, but we do have similar challenges in terms of what our own emissions profiles are as well, and we've done an inventory for the council as well. What that's allowed us to do as a local authority is to understand the size of change required. So the downward red arrows on the left hand side show that we need to reduce our fleet emissions by 90% by 2030, heat and electricity by 75%, and so on and so forth. We also feel that we have a responsibility in terms of our commuting miles and how our group of companies and our supply chains operate as well, or certainly how we can support our supply chains over time. So while we only in theory have to look at some of our direct emissions or sort of scope 1 and scope 2, we think as a local authority that we have to go beyond that in terms of our leadership role, to look slightly beyond that in terms of things like commuting. We can't get down to zero emissions. It will be a net position. So overall, we're looking at around a circa 70% reduction of our emissions overall by 2030. So we will have to look at increasing renewables on our estate, and also carbon capture through the Forest for Cornwall on our county farms estates, amongst other things, to ensure that by 2030 we are in a sort of carbon neutral position. But this has been really helpful as an organisation. I think any organisation that wants to start, you know, stress testing what it needs to do has to go through sort of a similar process to understand what that trajectory might look like moving forward in terms of reducing those emissions. I won't go into detail of this, but this is a slightly more granular year-on-year reduction that we need to make in those areas that are on that on that left-hand side. As an organisation that's as big as Cornwall Council, we have to keep things as simple as we possibly can, and ensure that services across the board understand what their obligations are year on year in terms of those emission reductions. Some of them are going to be really challenging. Some of them, I think, based on the sort of the COVID impact, I think we should be able to make a reasonably good progress on. And we're obviously very happy to share this sort of approach with people who are here today, but hopefully just gives you some idea of how we are visualising and driving change throughout our organisation. One of the things that we've also found really helpful as a local authority is putting a value. So carbon costs, it costs the planet, but it also costs money. There's always a cost to carbon. So one of the things we did very early on was to start looking at what the financial savings can be from reducing your carbon impact. Again, I'm not going to go into all of the details on this, but you can see alone that, you know, if you start looking at, you know, reductions in your electricity, reduction in your paper consumption, you start to look at reducing business miles and so on and so forth, you can make significant financial savings. And I think that is a it's a very important consideration that sometimes people think green costs money. Sometimes it can, and you do have to do upfront investments. But actually, if you look at whole life costs, usually reducing carbon is good for the bottom line as well. So again, I think you know, whatever organisation you represent or however you're trying to engage with this, I think that's something just to be mindful of as well. And it certainly helped in some of our internal discussions. Something else as well, which we think has replicability outside of the council, is that we've changed the way that we make our decisions within the council. We've used a version of the Katie Rayworth donor economics model, which starts to look at the social determinants of our decision making, but also the environmental and climate change implications of our decision making. So all cabinet decisions have had to go through this process now since September 2019, but this has been digitised and is now being rolled out across all of our decision making as a local authority. What it allows us to do is to aggregate the impact in terms of emissions on an annual basis of all of our decisions. Once we've got this fully automated, though we can do it manually, but it takes a lot of time. But again, I think this is a model that you know, it's not specific to Cornwall Council. These are the types of decision-making models I think that can be used by lots of organisations. I know Helston are using a version of this as well, and other areas across the UK and indeed across the world are using this as well. So it's a very powerful tool to help make a more balanced appraisal of what our decisions are as a local authority. Something else we've been doing as well is embedding the principles of the climate emergency and the ecological emergency into a lot of our strategic documents, working hard with the Local Enterprise Partnership, public health colleagues, but also developing something called a development plan document, a climate emergency development plan document, which will start to look at potential spatial allocations for renewables, but also local nature recovery, which is linked very closely to the emerging environment bill, and we are currently piloting a local nature recovery strategy as well. So although strategies can sometimes turn people off in terms of, you know, it sounds it can be a bit techie, actually from a local authority perspective, it's really important that we embed change across all of our levers of the different policies and how we work across with partner organisations as well. And the decision wheel is really important in terms of how we measure our success in changing our sort of policy approach. I think Pete is now going to quickly take over on this particular slide. Okay,
thanks, Steve. So the last 12 months then, what's been achieved, and there's been quite a lot. So if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, that's specifically Carbon Neutral Council, and you look on the right-hand side of the chart, and that points us towards a carbon neutral Cornwall. So what's been going on specifically over the last 12 months? Well, we've entered into a new renewable energy contract for our energy supply. That's something quite simple that people can do individually as well as organisationally. We've transitioned 11 of our fleet vehicles to electric vehicles, and we've introduced a number of electric bikes into the services that we provide. So some of our civil enforcement officers will be cycling around when it's quite a tight patch like the centre of Truro. They'll be cycling rather than using any vehicle other than an electric bike. We've built a wind turbine at Venton Teague. We've got the decision wheel that Steve's just alluded to. We've got 120 green champions across our staff and workforce, and we've got a climate change literacy e-learning course that's being rolled out across the council to try and raise awareness, and then specifically a manager's literacy course as well about what we need to do in the future and how our behaviours need to change and how they can manage in this new environment. And we've got a social value policy that's supposed to drive sustainability through our supply chain, and that again is in its early form, but has started to make some differences. So what's happening on the wider front? Well, we're delivering forests for Cornwall, again working with partners. The council can't do it on its own. We've secured ERDF funding to add a further 150 charge points for EVs for electric vehicles across Cornwall. We've got a programme of housing retrofit at the minute. That is going to be a challenge with the housing stock that's in Cornwall not necessarily being energy efficient and quite difficult to treat. We've got a retrofit programme that's going to benefit 900 homes that is going to be an element of learning that can then be accelerated out elsewhere, hopefully. There's the DPD that I've already mentioned, and we're trying to facilitate community engagement and sustainability projects through a range of match funding, and we became the 100th member of the UK 100, which is effectively a partnership across local authorities, but again is trying to drive best practice. We're keen to learn from others. We don't have all the answers. Whilst we were shortlisted for an award last year by the MJ, which is quite prestigious in local government terms, we're not resting on our laurels, and we're keen to learn from others as well as lead the way where we're able to. Next slide, Steve, please. Thanks. So where does this take us then? I think if we start off with how do we work, we have been working differently in the last 12 months, and that will have a long-lasting effect. How do we reduce waste? That's something that Cornwall Council itself has been doing to move towards plastic free. How do we create and use energy? How do we travel? How do we consume? How do we live? And ultimately, how do we enhance the environment upon which all of those things rely? We won't be living in the same way if we don't look after the environment. And there's almost a triangle of need for me, with the environment at the bottom, the economy and society above it, but without the environment, economy and society and economy just simply can't survive. So the triangle has the environment at the bottom, and that is going to be the way in which we need to look at the environment as well as the climate emergency and start to address both. Okay, so at this point, Jackie will just come in and talk a little bit about where we are with our waste and recycling rates, etc. Over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Peter. The last slide said it well, really, how you can help Cornwall to become carbon neutral. And I think one of the things that everybody thinks straight away with regards to climate change is recycling and how much plastic and all of those issues. And I think it's really interesting that everybody focuses on recycling because actually waste prevention is the best way of reducing our waste carbon footprint. And most people will see recycling as the key objective. So I thought I'd just show the current recycling rates for Cornwall, their last year's recycling rates. And the green shows those top performing, and those on the right hand side show the bottom performing. And I suppose the message today is just that we can do so much better, even with the services that we've got. But I just wanted to point out some of the kilograms per household measures that are on the tables, which are the first columns. And although, for example, some of the wards have got really good recycling rates for Cornwall, their kilograms per property are actually quite high. The 721 at the top of the table, for instance. And I think it's something that all of us can think about going forward, is how much we can reduce our waste as well as taking part in the recycling services. So I'll let you read those, but if you need to check your recycling rates for your area particularly, you can go onto the council's website and have a look at your Where I Live search engine, and that will bring up the data specifically for your area. You go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so what can you recycle? I'm hoping everybody's familiar with the bags and boxes, but just to say that 20% of everything that's in the black sacks is still recyclable. So there's a lot of people out there that still aren't recycling as much as possible, and there's a really good A to Z tool now on our website that you can use and share with the community, which demonstrates not only the general cardboard and paper and plastic bottles, but goes a bit further with foil and aerosols and textiles, and gives you lots of handy hints and tips about what extra you can put into the recycling service to make the most of that. If you go on to the next slide, please. So gardening's a good one at the moment. Steve said at the start, you know, COVID's really impacted on us, and I think a lot more of us have come to learn to love our gardens a lot more. And certainly from my point of view, home composting, I used to love a lot, then got very busy at work, and I've grown to love it again. I imagine many of you on this call today are already avid home composters, but there's a lot of information out there that can be provided to the community, and it's something that we need to share, that knowledge, to make sure that the resource is used at home. You're absolutely wasting a really good resource if you're even giving it to the council in the garden waste collection. Home composting is definitely the key to improving the carbon footprint and to making the most of that resource. Not to put in the little plug, but you can get reduced cut price composters at that web link. And then if you can't do that, sorry, I'll just finish on the garden waste service. The subscriptions are live now for the next year of the garden waste collection service that we provide. It is really interesting that some people do still put garden waste out in the black bag service, so it does get taken to the incinerator, but it isn't the best for our carbon footprint. Thanks, Steve. And then how you can help. You know, the council provide the services, and I know, you know, and you'll realise that there are plans afoot to change those, but there's a lot that can still be done at the moment. You can be an advocate for change. You can model best practice yourselves. You can engage with us at Cornwall Recycles on social media. There's a lot of information that we share via social media forums. And if you know other groups and networks who benefit from working with us as part of that social network, then please let us know. Just to touch on promotion and waste prevention a bit further, there is a lot of information available. Love Food, Hate Waste is a really good national campaign that looks at things like shopping smart and portion control and using your freezer and using leftovers. And that certainly is, if you are already recycling as much as you can through our curbside service, that is definitely the next thing for you to look at. Repair cafes are also getting very popular in Cornwall. There are several opening, and it's been very challenging during COVID times, but I'm hoping that they will start to operate again. And of course, they've been very popular on telly lately, so we've got a really good place to start with those. And washable nappies, again, those of us of a certain age will remember them well, but they're really fashionable again now. And certainly a lot of my friends who've had children recently try them and have loved them. So we've got a lot of information about all of these waste prevention measures that we can share with the community if you're interested. So yeah, that's my message, I suppose, today. There's a lot of information out there. You can certainly help us by being an advocate and sharing best practice, and let us know if you'd benefit from any of our presentations or working with us. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to take us through almost to the end now. So I think in the spirit of what Jackie was just saying, and the fact that the council is working with a wide range of partners. One of the things that we did early on was to set up a sector panel, and that's purely based around the from a Cornwall perspective, the sectors that are you know, some of our key emitting sectors. So we meet with representatives of those on a sort of a bi-monthly basis, and we've got some really useful steers in terms of where those sectors think they can start to make some incremental changes on a local level. It's still relatively early days, but again, this is something where there's so many stakeholders that have got the ideas and the solutions and potentially the resources to help starting to drive this change. So this is just to give you a flavour that there's a lot of people involved in the work that has been undertaken. Hopefully, some of you will be aware of the carbon neutral hive. We have a sort of an interactive web presence which tries to capture the work of so many different organisations, town and parish councils, individuals, just all the different events that are going on as well. And it's an incredibly useful resource for us, but it's also hopefully really helpful for others as well. And we are trying to keep it as a sort of a living web page, but also has some really useful links to tools that anyone can use, any organisation can use. So carbon calculators and the like. So hopefully some of you have seen that already. We have also worked with Crowdfund Cornwall and put some seed funding into Crowdfunder as well to try and help pump prime sort of small pockets of funding for climate related projects as well. So if there's enough support there to do the crowdfunding, then there is some match funding available as well. So hopefully some of you will have will have engaged with that, and if not, hopefully you will in the future. This is pretty much more of the same. We did release a sort of a call to action, which can be downloaded from the website, but it actually gives a really useful overview of the types of things that you as an individual or as an organisation can start to look at in terms of how you might want to shape your own activities. And we're also working with like Pirate FM as well on like a green month where they're starting to get some sort of quite simple but hopefully profound messages out about how we as individuals can start to look at the way we live, work and travel and so on and so forth. So it is part of just trying to get a little bit of momentum really around what needs to be done. I won't go into too much detail because I've mentioned this already, but again, this can all be accessed by the website, and again, hopefully some of you have seen that call to action. There are some resources that are available. We always try and use best practice from others. I'm not saying Health and Climate Action are the only sort of exemplars out there, but they are doing some great stuff. So we try and capture that wherever we can. The impact carbon footprint calculator is really useful because you can sort of tap in your parish and it sort of brings up a sort of a snapshot of sort of a carbon and emissions. CO2e emissions, so that's quite useful in terms of having like a sort of a fairly basic but useful inventory. So going back to what I was talking about earlier around evidence, and as I said, the hive I think is really useful, and we are hopefully going to start moving towards having some additional workshops. Obviously we haven't been able to do physical workshops now since we did a fairly major one in Liscard, but we have been trying to have some online events during the last 12 months or so. Some of this is still to come, but I won't go through all of it, but as I said, we do have some e-learning modules which could potentially be used by others. There are sort of licenses for that, but there's some opportunities there just to sort of take what we've already done and learn from that, and hopefully that engage with that and use it in the way that we've gone through a lot of the pain already. So hopefully that will be some helpful resources. We're also doing like member induction events and presentations, and again, these are the types of things that can be readily available for others to use within their own organisational framework as well. So hopefully there's some tools that are, we might be developing them, but they can be used across a much wider application than that. One thing that we were sort of asked to briefly touch upon was so you've heard hopefully, and you're starting to get a flavour for, there's loads of stuff that can be done locally there really is a huge amount that can be done through working collaboratively and utilising our joined up resources to affect change, and there's nothing inhibiting us collectively cracking on with a lot of things. But there are a few areas where we think that the ability to affect that change falls outside of local systems, and one of those areas, for instance, is that there is a real challenge around retrofit of properties. Cornwall has circa 80,000 solid wall properties. When you're talking about, could be for a whole house retrofit 30, 40, 50,000 per property, and even lower level retrofits can still cost tens of thousands. It doesn't, take a genius to work out that you're talking about significant resources. And I think there was a recent environmental committee report on the challenge of retrofit, which has been there for a long time. It really has. We're also interested in things like future home standard, and so hopefully we won't be retrofitting in the future. Nature recovery is a huge area of focus for us as well, and as I said, we are a national pilot, and there's been some very helpful sort of announcements around sort of accelerating nature recovery towards 2030. But probably one of the most long-standing challenges that we've encountered is grid, and a constrained grid, and what the impact of that will be for our ability to decarbonise our energy infrastructure at pace. We are in discussions with Ofgem and Western Power Distribution on the issue of grid, running up to the 2023 sort of price control period. But it has been an inhibitor for a number of years now, and those are things again that I think need discussions at multiple levels. This is just a summary of what a lot of what you've heard. It's on a single slide, and at the bottom that just reinforces that there are a few areas that we think are probably out of our control, where we need to be working with others to try and facilitate that. But hopefully this is just a neat summary of a lot of what you've heard today, and again we'll very happily share all of this material. So I think it's over to Pete just to round it off on this final slide.
Yeah. Okay. This is one of my favourite and also least favourite slides, to be honest, to share, and it's taken from the Economist cartoon that effectively shows that COVID, we can't treat COVID as a one-off finite event with a beginning and an end. It's clearly not going to operate that way. And likewise, looming fast behind is climate change, the effects of which we're feeling already. So we do, as residents, as individuals, as communities, as businesses, we've got to get ourselves into a more resilient position, because we are in an unprecedented period of change. That change isn't going to stop, it's going to continue apace, and we all need to work together, one and all, to make the difference that's going to be recognised by future generations. It's our opportunity, and I'd endorse us to work together as closely as we can. Happy at this point to take questions. I don't pretend that we are all the gurus with every answer to every question. It's a collective effort, but thank you for the time, and we'll try and take some questions if you wish.
Thanks so much to the three of you for that. I think it is quite inspiring, really, to hear the depth to which all has gone into, really. Something I'd like to ask, actually, related to the future home standards, because it's already come up in Penzance, is that the sort of next level up about design guides for housing developments to do with orientation of properties for maximum solar gain, priority to pedestrians and cyclists, tree canopy percentage, that sort of stuff. Is there any kind of thought of doing that?
Steve, do you want to pick up the bit on the DPD, and then I'll pick up a bit about Treveth, perhaps?
So I think in terms of the DPD, we are looking at the issue of we're looking more around it, sort of an energy efficiency perspective at the moment, and some of the future home standards concerns that we had were around was just about what level of sort of building control and building regs we would get in terms of the energy efficiency integrity of those properties in the future. I'd have to double check around whether that DPD is picking up on things like orientation of future builds. Yeah, I would love to say I'm a planning expert, but unfortunately, that's not my area.
Yeah, I don't think it'll go that far, Jonathan. But in terms of the council has created its own housing company called Divestment that effectively has created a design code. You know, for example, we won't be putting mains gas into any of the properties that have been built or will be built. So we have got a design code for our own developments that hopefully will lead the way and will be a showcase for others. There's work done with the British Research Establishment in terms of creating that design code and trying to lead by example. But again, there are some things that can happen locally and some things that need to happen nationally in terms of legislation, particularly around building regulations that can up the game quite significantly. So thank you, good question. Not a complete answer, but
oh, thank you very much. Okay, well, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Keep on putting them in there. Shall we ask people to ask their own questions? Lynn Jones, you want to unmute yourself?
Sorry, am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
I even show my face. Thank you for a very informative talk, and it's really impressive, everything you're doing. I would like to ask about divestment. I'm one of the people in my own Royal College of Psychiatry who got them to divest completely at the beginning of the year, along with 6 other medical colleges. And I'm interested in where Cornwall Council is on that, because my understanding is there's still quite a lot of investment in various funds that are, it's not that you directly invest, but that you invest in funds that are invested in fossil fuels, and how you're tackling. I know it's a difficult issue. I've been through it with the college.
I wouldn't pretend that I know all the answer to that, but I know that that most of our investments are held in relation to our pension fund that operates a little bit arm's length. I do know that question has been asked by elected members. Likewise, the council holds some funds at a corporate level, reserves that are just prudent and good and best practice. I know that it's a live issue. I can't pretend that I can give you an answer specifically right now in terms of what's happened, but I know it's a live issue and has been raised by members, and I do know that there's changes that have happened on the back of that, but I'm not close enough to the detail to be able to explain them, I'm afraid, but it is on the agenda.
Okay. Holly Whitelaw, would you like to?
Good afternoon all, hello. I remember many moons ago, Derek, you offered to try and drag down the Minister for Energy to chat with Cornwall, and basically I don't know whether that's happened, and I'm interested to know if that's going to happen, if it hasn't, and where that's got. And really just to highlight, I live for example off mains gas here in St Just, and we really can't afford to heat off our mouldy homes and eat and you know, pay the mortgage. So I'm really keen to make sure that Cornwall, the council, prioritise areas off mains gas when it comes to the grid preferences for anything renewable, because hopefully long term we might be able to get some hydrogen down our gas pipes, but us here in the peripheral edges are going to struggle. Over to you, Derek, first.
Thank you, Holly. I do remember that, and no, it didn't happen. Well, it did happen, but not in the way that you're suggesting, because it fell during the 2017 election. But curiously, this group has invited a minister to speak at our May meeting, but I don't want to commit to that until I don't want to commit to who until we know definitely that that's happening. But so that could be covered then. On the second bit, and I'm not going to steal the thunder of the people here, but the retrofitting and keeping the cost. I mean, I think possibly Peter already mentioned how actually the most vulnerable might well be hurt by the very plans we have to try and retrofit homes. But I think the whole EPC business needs to be reformed, and we do need to find a way of making sure that we can fund the retrofitting of homes, including the heating part of it, and get off fossil fuel. Half of the homes in my constituency are off grid anyway, gas grid. So most of them are oil and bottled gas, which is, those of you that have it, bottled gas in particular is very expensive. But the council officers can explain a bit more about how that challenge is going forward. So it's a huge challenge.
I mean, the grid itself is a challenge in terms of its constrained as it stands. So prioritising areas, I'm not sure will necessarily follow. There are some blockages in the pipeline, so to speak, in terms of national infrastructure that will constrain the renewable market. I think I've just leaned on my mute button. I don't know how much of that you got. Perhaps I'm self-editing now.
Most of it, Peter, we got. But I just
okay.
A little while back, I was talking with. I used to do renewables, and I was talking with Western Power, and they were putting so much emphasis on the smart grid. And I wonder whether a rollout of information around smart meters to say, hey, these things aren't so scary, they don't use so much energy, would be beneficial long term for the likes of myself who can't afford to put the heating on. And in that respect, I want to just mention to Jackie that on the streets, a lot of people still think that our recycling is being sent around the world, and it really puts them off. And so a campaign on that, a joined up campaign from ground up, bottom down, would be really useful, I think. Because people just go, can't be bothered, it only gets shipped out to sea, you know, and ignorance is annoying.
I think on the issue of the grid, it is a really complicated one. I think in the presentation, I think, you know, the council has limited ability to impact on the actual upgrades of the grid. That is controlled by Western Power Distribution, who also have to report into the regulator, Ofgem, and part of the, whether we agree with it or not, the way that is worked is that the upgrade of that system and the way that it switches from what they currently call a district network operator to something that is more akin to a smart system or a district system operator rather than district network operator, is largely based on what they think the demand is going to be moving forward. Now, we're working really hard as best we can to say that Cornwall has lots of latent demand. There is a sort of a disinvestment position at the moment with renewable generation, and speaking to Western Power and Ofgem quite recently, they said that we have made that position very strongly, and their words are, we are now at provisionally we're very high up to, you know, towards the top of the tree in terms of what those future investment scenarios might look like for the grid, which I think is testament to the effort that everybody has put into to taking Cornwall a long way on that decarbonisation agenda. But it is, as I say, it is, you know, Ofgem are they are a regulator, and they do have a fair degree of independence from pretty much everyone, you know, and they have to balance what they think are absolutely 100% the needs of the net zero transition with trying to retain some form of price control to ensure that that, you know, prices don't skyrocket, basically. So we are really pushing hard on that, but you know, any any support that you know that we can get on making those arguments even stronger is always welcome.
Thank you. Liz would like to ask a question about the Green Homes Grant. Just before that, I see a couple of people who've got their hands up. I think it's better if you can put your questions into the chat, then we can get you in the sequence properly, really. Thanks. Liz, over to you if you're unmuted. No? I'll ask you a question, maybe. On trying to engage with the Green Homes Grant via the Cornwall Council website, I found that there are no Trustpilot approved builders in Cornwall, so I have so far been unable to proceed. This has been the case for others I've talked to. Any pointers would be great to make the scheme more usable. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not close enough to know the detail, I'm afraid. Steve, have you got anything to comment on that? I'm not sure. It's not a council scheme. Council's party to try and promote it, but it's not a council scheme, I'm afraid. So not sure about the number of accredited providers.
It might be worth Derek, maybe.
Yeah, I can actually comment back on that. That's been raised in my office lots of times. We've written to BEIS, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, to see what more can be done to get Cornish contractors involved. The problem is, and I wouldn't, to be fair, the intent is good, but I'm not sure it's the brightest thing that the government actually did in response to COVID, because the reason Cornish contractors are not getting involved is because they're already very busy and they already have plenty of work to do. And so we have got examples which we've had before, and the council officers, including Anthony Ball, who dealt with this on the council, have got exactly the same experience. I don't want to put people off. Use it if you can, but we've got a number of constituents who have had work done by people who have come from a long way away, and the work isn't up to standard, and we've got enormous problems, so much so that we've reported them to trading standards and to government to actually make sure that the procurement bit is much better. But the issue is that we've got a very busy construction industry, and the programme is too short to actually enable what would really be better, and that's actually to train people in the skills to do the work. So it needs to be much. So the argument we're making to Treasury now is actually to really do this properly. It has to be over a long period of time. And dare I say it, and this is a conversation I've had with Steve, I think you, and with the other city councillors, that actually money is given to the local authorities to commission the work rather than being done in the way it has been done. So I think the intention is right. It's £2 billion worth of money, but the rollout is unfortunate. It's actually not going to be a success. I hate to say that in this kind of public forum, but we're trying to do it. But people are too busy in Cornwall or reluctant to engage in that kind of scheme, the contractors.
Thank you. I was going to say, while you're there, did you want to say something more about smart meters, Derek?
Well, Holly made, and again, Stephen, I think we discussed this before, and I know that you're absolutely right. Cornwall Council are not responsible for the smart meter rollout, but Holly raised the important point about engagement with smart meters. And the truth is that legislation has been introduced so that if those of you who have electric cars have a charger fitted to your home, it has to be compatible with a smart meter. Appliances that you now buy should be compatible with a smart meter. So the intention is that when the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, things like your cars and other things, or when there's energy in the market, similar to the principle of Economy 7, those appliances kick in if that's the right thing to do for your lifestyle. So we do probably need to look at how we can work together to encourage people to engage in the smart meter rollout more than they have, partly because it's improved enormously. I mean, the government's we had various problems with the first generation of smart meters. That's improved. Again, we've got a shortage of engineers, but it is part of the solution. We won't get the UK will not get to net zero without proper application and implementation of the smart meter rollout. So Holly, you're right to raise it. And the conversation I think I had with you, Stephen, if not with you, it was someone else in the council, was about whether we should actually get the energy suppliers together and look at how we can do some concerted work across Cornwall to encourage take up, because people are very reluctant to. Some are very reluctant. There's been progress, but not enough.
Okay.
It certainly does make a difference. Now I can see I've got a smart meter fitted only recently, and I am a bit obsessed with it, to be honest. So it has reduced my consumption for sure. And if that has a knock-on effect across the rollout, then for sure it'll make a difference. Yeah. Anyway, less about my finances. Let's keep going.
Thank you. So there's Georgia would like to ask a question about people in rented accommodation. Would you like to do that yourself, Georgia? No. Okay, I'll ask the question for her then. A large proportion of people who are not exactly pro climate change, I believe in climate change, I suppose, willing to make greener differences are the younger generation. However, the majority of these are in rented accommodation. Most rented accommodation prohibits making greener changes, introducing compost heaps, etc. Are Cornwall Council looking into the changes that tenants can make to properties in order to reduce their carbon output?
I think in terms of the council doesn't manage the private sector. That would be national legislation that would be needed, but the council has been taking a lead approach in the private rented sector as well, in building a number of houses, some in Bodmin, some in Tolbaden as a pilot scheme that then will be rolled out. We're offering 3-year tenancies because we recognise that many private landlords are just on assured short hold tenancies with quite short notice periods, and so we have launched through our company Treveth a private rented sector to try and improve tenure, to try and improve people's security, and likewise to allow those properties that are more energy efficient. But there's a long way to go, and it's a really good point that's made there, that whilst landlords can do things, and I think they can access the Green Deal as a landlord to try and improve things for their tenants, there's less incentive for them to do so, and there is a constraint, as you rightly point out. I'm afraid it's not within the local council's gift to resolve that, but if we get the opportunity to raise it at any other forum, then I'm happy to do it. It's a good point, and one that I take to heart, because I do think the younger generation in part are willing to engage in the agenda, and there are constraints. I would hope that landlords don't refuse things like compost bins, but they may do, and there's nothing that could stop them other than the legislation, and I doubt that will come quickly. It's about educating landlords as much as anything, and there are some landlord forums as well. Not sure if my colleagues engage with them in economic development, but I'll pick that up with the strategic director particularly around his business, and his engagement with the private rented sector is equally through a forum of private sector developers. So there might be something that we could pick up there. I'll take that away, but I don't think I've got an easy solution to it, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So Katerina asks, how can farmland be more efficiently overseen to prevent soil erosion? And in the case of disused farmland, how can it be protected for reuse for tree planting and wildflower planting and protection from redevelopment?
Okay, we're not planners. Steve, do you want to just talk about the nature recovery pilot that we're involved in, and how that learning may shape out, or anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so I think there's some, I mean, Derek may be better positioned to speak on this, but there is legislation coming down the line. So we've had the Agriculture Act, and we've got the Environment Bill, which hopefully will become an act at some point this year. And there is going to be a fundamental, sorry, Derek, you probably should be saying all this, but I think there will be a fundamental reset of land management practices. So you're going to have environmental land management, and there's already test and trials going on in Cornwall now, which include enhanced soil management, as well as looking at nature recovery, in sort of marginal areas of agricultural holdings. So I think there's I think there are some really, potentially quite exciting things coming down the line in terms of how the move away from the direct payment system towards the environmental land management system, and in terms of that, how that land stewardship is done for the public good will evolve over the coming years. We have very small sort of influence over that as a local authority. We do have county farms, and we are utilising, or the proposal is that we will utilise significant areas of our county farms for things such as Forest for Cornwall, and looking at tree planting schemes, always trying to get that balance right between making sure they still remain an ongoing concern, but making sure absolutely that we start to shift to more regenerative ways of farming. So I think that the relationship, 75% of Cornwall's landmass is farmed. So how we over time can work with that community, I think is going to be absolutely crucial in soil health, but also that the nature recovery drivers that we've got both locally and nationally.
Thank you. So next question is from Leslie Bradley. What does Cornwall Council think about the Climate and Ecological Emergency Private Members Bill? Penzance Town Council, Helston Town Council and many climate action groups are in support and see the legislation to be the only one that addresses the urgency with which we need to act to protect our future generations.
Okay, I think we are in a period of purdah. We're not going to comment as officers on a piece of legislation that's coming down the track, I'm afraid. So it's for people to form their own opinion on. I'm not going to offer an opinion on a bit of legislation that's being progressed, I'm afraid. I don't want to be difficult about that, but I'm just conscious of where we are in the political cycle.
Okay, so Trevor Toms says, Cornwall Council own or manage a lot of urban green spaces. Does Cornwall Council have a policy with respect to LNRS that makes better use of green spaces rather than Cormac just mowing them? Fossil fuel intensive, in brackets. Or is it up to town councils and community groups to request permission to use them?
I think we have changed our policy, and I think whilst we touched in our presentation on COVID, making some changes necessary to the way in which we travel, it's equally made changes to the way in which we manage grass verges and how we manage our parkland. Before COVID, we equally benefited from a £3 million grant to introduce making space for nature, we're calling it, and you can Google that or look on the council's website. And we have been transforming many areas of parkland where we've previously mowed it, as you've said, and we have started to transform some of the verges into much more wildlife friendly havens. We have been cutting down on our grass cutting. We have changed the approach to urban verges as we describe them, which is highway verges. We have done some wildflower seeding on the A390 into St Austell, and that is a plan that we're going to continue to enact going forwards into the future. So it's incremental, it's not happening all at once, but we have changed our policy, and we will continue to. There's some spaces where it does need to be cut, of course, for recreational purposes, for people playing football and other things that we want them to be doing, but there's lots of space for nature around the verges that we can do things differently, and we have in earnest started to enact those changes. So hopefully you'll see something positive in your locality soon. But if you've got any specific ideas for a green space that's managed by the council, then by all means come forward with some suggestions and we'll look at them. But it is an incremental rollout that's been initially facilitated by a significant grant to get things moving, and that learning has changed. So we bought some machinery now called Grillos, which reminds me of a story that my kids enjoyed me reading to them about the Gruffalo, but it's not a Gruffalo, it's a Grillo. And again, you can Google that. We've bought a number of them. Cormac are waiting for some on order at the minute, and we will be effectively collecting to strip out the nutrients after a much longer opportunity for wildflowers. We will collect through this Grillo machine, and our regime is changing across the board where we're able to do it. So it's a good point. Happy to provide you with some more information on that Derek could circulate to the group if you're interested.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thanks. Okay. Angelo, you had your hand up earlier, so I think probably you're able to speak if you can be unmuted. There we go.
Can you hear me okay? Hi, everyone. Three broad questions, really. Thank you for the presentation. I was a little bit late. The main question is, I'm based in St. Earth, and obviously we have the recycling centre here. And I'm keen to understand, I was interested to hear the comments about recycling and the recycling rates. But I wondered why the new Cornwall Council waste contract doesn't actually include Tetra Paks, for example. And the new CETA site actually doesn't include the contract, because there is so much food waste already in our rubbish, actually that gets exported to Devon, as I understand it. So I was just wondering, we have an aerobic digester in Cornwall, perhaps rather than exporting it, we might do something with it. I have a couple of other minor questions, but that was the thrust of it at the moment.
Thanks, Angelo. Yeah, with regards to cartons, they're not discounted from the new contract. We're just not in a position to roll that out to the community just yet. It's a matter of finance, obviously. It is one of the minor waste streams that we get through the black bag service. We do accept them at some of the recycling centres. So if people are so inclined and they are making trips there anyway, collect them up and take them to the main recycling centres. I've got to say though that because I know I can't recycle them, I don't buy them. But that's a personal choice. So, waste prevention is always at the heart of everything that I'm saying lately.
Which kind of leads me to my second question. Sorry, thank you for that. Which is really around it's having worked in the on some of these issues. What are the current behavioural change campaigns that Cornwall Council is initiating on some of these topics? So, like you say, cartons can't be recycled. But a behavioural change campaign to engage with the public, to reduce those or to educate and to drive change would for me, would make sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. The campaigns have started this year. The first thing we're doing is promoting the Recycling A to Z on social media. You'll probably have seen that. And the next thing is off the back of the new fleet, there's the Don't Bin Me, Recycle Me campaign. And we are basically starting from scratch with this because there is a lot of people, as Holly already said, that don't trust the system right now. They don't understand where things are going. So the behaviour is literally use the recycling service. And you'll see coming up over the next few months some behavioural change campaigns that are recycle one more thing. And they will pick on particular materials, so you'll see those coming out.
Thanks for that. Final question was just around at Cornwall level. Is there one person that has an overview of the carbon figure? Obviously, there are questions about how we decide that, but who has the sort of overview? Are we going to make it to 2030? Net zero, or should we be aiming really for negative carbon and carbon sequestration and capture to move the agenda faster?
So I guess if you're going to say it's down to one person, I have a pretty good oversight of what Cornwall's carbon inventory looks like, although that is readily publicly accessible. in terms of the carbon inventory. As I'm sure you're aware, it's this is a technicality, but you always have a 2-year lag on carbon inventories as well. So there is there are some complexities about monitoring progress. The broad principles of what the council is doing is we can control what we can control. A lot of the the big changes are predicated on how people work together, how organisations work together, how individuals start to engage with some of the behaviours that we've already been talking about. So I don't think there's any one organisation that is like an arbiter for whether this is going to be successful. What Cornwall Council does have is and will commit to is that we will keep monitoring progress. So I think in that sense that's something that we will do, and as best we can we will work with others to try and help sort of focus on the areas where we think we can make the most difference. But quite often we do not have the levers directly over the changes that are required. So it's as much about working with yourselves, government, and a whole range of stakeholders. But we will commit to keep monitoring that progress. Whether we'll make 2030, I don't know, is the honest answer. But what I do know is it will absolutely require, and that's what Pete was saying earlier in the presentation. It's yes, we need to decarbonise our energy, but we also need to look at those, carbon sequestration approaches, nature recovery, and looking at marine carbon capture as well as terrestrial-based carbon capture. All those things are part of the mix, and wherever we can work with partners that can help accelerate that, we will. So hopefully, we're as well placed as anyone about understanding what the size of the challenge is.
Thank you for those answers. I just wanted to add on a couple of things, questions really to Jackie related to recycling. I once ticked a box saying, would you be willing to be a recycling champion? I'm not sure I've ever heard anything since, but is that still an idea?
It is still an idea. There are recycling champions. I'm getting you back on the list.
Okay. And my other question was related to food waste collections, really. I'm just wondering if, it's on the horizon to have more sort of community-based anaerobic digesters for food waste, because clearly there are lots of households where they can't have a compost heap or whatever. But it seems crazy to have it being trucked off miles for composting. It needs to be closer to home, really.
Yeah, the plans aren't finalised yet for the anaerobic digesters, but there are capacity in the ones just over the border in Devon.
Right.
So you're balancing up building new facilities versus using the capacity that's already available. But I will say that once we do roll out that food waste recycling service, you'll be amazed how quickly you reduce how much food waste you're throwing away. There won't be much left.
Personally, I've got a wormery.
Yeah, ideal. Yeah,
that's good.
Okay. I'm just checking whether there's any other questions that have popped up. I think they're just thank yous. And there were quite a lot of requests for the PowerPoint presentation. So that can be made available perhaps in an email out from Derek's office. I don't know.
Yeah, we're happy to share it. That's the whole point.
Okay.
Of what we're doing here. So more happy to share.
So have I missed anybody from the chat?
Jonathan, can I quickly come in on that last point? It's Derek.
Yes.
There's a great bit of kit that was developed by a number 10, possibly number 11 challenge for developing equipment to deal with waste, and it's called HERU, so it's HERU. The problem, they can be done for a domestic use, so they're about the size of a fridge. You can literally put pretty much everything from your household into it, and it creates heat, and there's basically no emissions whatsoever. It's a really clever bit of kit. The problem with that, it obviously probably weakens the ability for the council to deliver a universal recycling system for everybody. So it's ideal for the Isle of Scilly, maybe not here, but it might be something that Cornwall officers might want to look at, because in terms of community gathering of waste and delivering something a return locally, maybe to a community centre, it might be a really interesting bit of work, and it's the kind of thing that might well get grant funding. But it's called HERU, so it's HERU, and it's developed to be a commercial product, and it can be very big and cost huge amounts of money, or it can be quite small and go in a home and deliver your own personal homes a result for you. But it's a really good bit of technology that is one of lots of different ways of trying to address this enormous problem of getting on top of waste, but also reducing our carbon footprint. People might be interested in researching it.
Yeah, well, we'll take a look at that. It's not something I'm familiar with, but I'm happy to look at it. And in the longer term, we will deal with food waste more locally. Is the plan, but we're a little bit away from that at this stage.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I think we can thank everybody for coming. Thank you very much to Jackie, Peter and Stephen for
Jonathan,
waving your hand, Holly.
Yeah, sorry, I just did have a question you missed. It was just, I can't remember if it was Peter or Steve mentioned that you plan to influence communities to help us hit net zero. And I was just wondering what that might look like, if you've got any plans on how to influence communities. Yeah.
I suppose we're doing it through things like the hive and pointing people towards that as a network, so that there's great things that come out of that. We're trying to point people together into that forum, and that'll spring off in different directions. But we're equally, we've got elected members. Obviously, we've got elections coming up, but our intention will be very early after an election to be briefing our local members. They're advocates in the community. They should be close to the community, and likewise we want to hopefully educate's not the right word, but to inform where we are and what the size and scale of the challenge is. So I think there's lots of different ways, and we're open to ideas from you, Holly, as well as from others. We haven't got a blueprint. This is all brand new, isn't it, really, in terms of, I know climate change has been around for a long time, but the agenda starting to resonate with the public through the programs on the BBC, Blue Planet and other things. It's really started to capture the public imagination, but there is no blueprint, there is no template that we can take. We're making it up as we go along as best we can, and that's why we're happy to shape it and to move in different directions, because we haven't got I want to get to the point where I'm copying off town and parish councils. Town and parish councils are copying off me. I'm copying off others, because this is great practice, isn't it? It's a family of, it's a problem for all of us as a society, and only by coming together are we going to make a difference for it, because no one's going to do it for us. So you're right. What can we do to influence? How can we engage? We're doing it on all different levels. The waste recycling element is one. It's just not good enough as it stands at the minute. You know, we've got to get better, and we are making those incremental changes. But anything we can do to accelerate, we're keen to hear, and anything that you can do to disseminate the messages that we've put out today, happy for you to do so. But we haven't got the silver bullet, I'm afraid, of one blueprint that will work for everything.
Can I just suggest that I help organise Cornwall Climate Action Network with 55 different climate action groups, and then a lot of other NGOs as well. And what I think you could do is put more pressure and influence in those councils of yours, because it's very haphazard at the moment, and only 55 climate action groups, you know, when there's over 200 of the councils. Yeah, there's a lot of councils. Basically, they don't have enough time to manage this and energy, and one clerk might be bothered, one might not, and so really you need and Edwina Hannaford and we've had conversations and we've put in a proposal to actually pay people on the ground to act as climate action climate activators that link the council's energy to the community's energy. So you'll be seeing that coming through to your desk, perhaps, I don't know, but it's I think a whole new way of working with the community is needed. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. While you've been talking, other late entrants have come in. So Alex says the council received £23 million for improving buses prior to COVID. What will the council be doing to encourage people back to public transport?
I think, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not the transport guru, but I do know that scheme was intended to drive people in that direction. But I think we are in a different place, aren't we? We've seen from our own workforce that we've reduced journeys by 70%, and that will pick up as we go, as we relax, I'm sure. But what we can do to encourage people. Again, we're looking at improving cycling networks. We're looking at electric bikes in communities. We're looking at electric vehicles. We're looking at there's a car share club. There's other elements that are actively being considered, but people equally have to take some responsibility as well. Why are they doing the journeys? I must admit, my local spend has improved. I used to drive to 20 miles to Truro, and now my local spend is primarily in my local shop, where I cycle my electric bike, which I was privileged enough to be able to afford, which I know not everybody can, but I've bought an electric bike and it's great. And I'm equally trying to do more things local, and I think we're going to be in a different place, aren't we? So public transport's going to have to adapt. We have got the newest fleet of vehicles on the back of investment, so they're low emissioned, but in summer we're in a different place than we are in winter, and I'm sure our season will see our low emission public transport well used, but it's a challenge across the year. I don't know the answer to it. I'm not the transport guru, but I'm happy to equally find out a bit more about that, because I don't know enough, and I should do, to be able to answer your question. So thanks for the heads up on that. I'll pick the brains of my counterpart in transport as to what they're doing. Steve, are you able to add anything beyond what I've said specifically?
No, I think the bus subsidy scheme was it was designed to help with some of that modal shift. But I think, as Pete said, I can't speak for transport colleagues, but certainly from a climate programme perspective, we are starting to look at being more strategic about active travel, and we're doing some. We've commissioned some work to look at where potentially we might get the biggest return if we could start to invest in some of our active travel, like cycle networks, walking networks, and so on and so forth. So I think that yes, absolutely, we do need to, where we can, get people moving out of cars where possible. I think now it is a slightly more nuanced picture, where we also want to look at what the health and well-being benefits might be of people looking at more active travel options. And I do know that certainly from a Cornwall Council perspective, a huge number of people do live within just a couple of miles of where they work. So that's something that we're considering. But I'm not an expert, so I think we'd probably have to refer that one back.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we really are going to wind this up now. There's a comment from Leslie Bradley, which kind of connects with what Holly was saying. I think funding for local climate groups and environmental groups who already have grassroots members can help deliver the targets. And Angela mentioned about whether Cornwall Council has a green hosting and electric for all their home workers, that all their home workers make use of. So with that, I think we'll end it. We seem to be sharing somebody else's desk suddenly, and all sorts of strange things are happening. So I think we'd better leave soon. So thank you, all three of you, Jackie, Peter, and Stephen. It's been really great, and thank you all for all the questions that you've asked. I think it's good to know that the pandemic has had an impact on thinking. I think there are a lot of comparisons to be made, and there's sort of, I think Peter's cartoon sort of sums it all up really. That the major difference is probably between the pandemic and climate change is that there's going to be no idea of returning to previous idea of normal, which somehow during the pandemic is keeping people alive and wanting to carry on living and so on. So I think we'd be dishonest if we ignored that. But anyway, thank you all for your participation this afternoon, and hope to see many of you again next month.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, one and all.